She was 9, standing in a VIP cabin that suddenly felt like a locked room. Her hands were shaking, not because she'd done something wrong, but because the adults were pretending she didn't belong. Then Luna looked at the emergency intercom and whispered, "Please, I need you to see this." Because some rules only wake up for certain people. But to understand why Luna's hands were shaking in that VIP cabin, we need to go back. It started at Santa Marina Bay on a quiet morning that looked almost too peaceful to be real. The kind of morning where the ocean sits still, the gulls sound far away, and the air smells like salt and metal and coffee from a little stand near the gates. People were lining up for the Coastal Express, one of those sleek, high-speed trains that runs along the western shoreline, where the windows are so wide it feels like you're watching a movie instead of traveling. And for most people, it was just a ride, a weekend trip, a business meeting, a quick escape. But for Marcus Reed, nothing about this trip was ordinary. Marcus was the kind of man who didn't take up space loudly. He didn't walk around like he wanted attention. He didn't argue just to prove a point. He was steady, quiet, the sort of person who believed respect wasn't something you demanded, it was something you carried. And that morning, he was carrying something heavier than any suitcase. He walked beside 2 girls, Jade, 17, tall and tense like she'd been holding her breath for months, and Luna, 9 years old, small enough that her backpack looked oversized, like it might tip her backward if she leaned the wrong way. They weren't dressed fancy, not VP fancy. Marcus wore dark jeans and a simple jacket. Jade had a hoodie pulled up halfway, like armor. Luna had her hair neatly done, but her eyes looked like they'd grown up too fast. And in Luna's arms, held close like it was fragile glass, was a sketchbook. Not a new one, not clean. The corners were softened from hands touching it again and again. The cover had faint smudges where someone had traced it absent-mindedly, like a habit, like comfort. That sketchbook wasn't just paper. It was a living piece of someone they loved. Because the reason they were boarding that train wasn't vacation. It wasn't luxury. It was a promise. A promise to someone who wasn't there to hear it anymore. Months earlier, the girl's mother, Marcus's closest person in the world, had passed away unexpectedly. Not the kind of goodbye you prepare for. Not the kind where you get to say what you needed to say. One day she was there, filling the house with little noises, humming while washing dishes, laughing at her own jokes, leaving sticky notes that said things like, "Don't forget you're capable." And then she was gone. And in the middle of all that grief, there was one thing the girls refused to let disappear: her drawings. She used to sketch everywhere, on napkins, on receipts, on the back of old envelopes. She drew the ocean when she missed home. She drew the girls when they fell asleep on the couch. She drew little moments nobody else thought mattered. And that sketchbook, it was the only place those moments still lived together. Jade called it Mom's voice on paper. Luna called it the book that still smells like her. Marcus never called it anything out loud. He didn't have to. He just kept it safe. So when a memorial gathering was planned up north, close family, close friends, one quiet day to honor her the way she deserved, Marcus didn't hesitate. He booked the VIP cabin. Not because he wanted to be treated special, not because he cared about status, but because grief does something to you. It strips away the little excuses. It makes you realize how short life is, how fragile later can be.
And Marcus had heard her say it before. In that half-joking way people talk about dreams they don't think they're allowed to want. "One day," she'd said, smiling, "I want to take the nice cabin. I want the big windows. I want to sit where it feels calm." She'd said it like it was a silly wish. Marcus heard it like a promise. So there they were, on the day they needed peace the most, trying to do one small, beautiful thing in the middle of everything they'd lost. And Marcus did what he always did for those girls. He made sure they walked like they belonged. Not with arrogance, with dignity. When they reached the check-in point for VIP access, Marcus didn't rush. He didn't apologize for being there. He didn't over-explain. He simply handed over their passes calmly, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Because he understood something a lot of people don't. Kids don't learn confidence from speeches. They learn it from watching the adults they trust stand still when the world tries to shrink them. Jade stayed close, scanning faces the way teenagers do when they're trying not to look like they're scanning faces. Luna pressed the sketchbook tighter against her chest. And Marcus, steady as a lighthouse, guided them forward. But even then, even before they stepped into that cabin, there were signs, small ones, easy to miss if you've never been on the receiving end of them. A pause that lasted half a second too long when the attendant looked at their passes. A quick glance at Marcus's clothes, then back to the VIP sign, as if the two didn't match. A smile that didn't fully reach the eyes. Nothing you could point to and say, that right there, that's the moment. And that's how it usually starts. Not with yelling, not with obvious cruelty. It starts with a feeling that the peace you're hoping for might not be waiting for you. Because the truth is, a lot of heartbreak doesn't begin on your worst day. It begins on the day you were begging the world to let you have one calm moment, one quiet ride, one dignified goodbye. And Marcus Reed believed he could give those girls that. He believed that this ride, this coastal train, this VIP cabin, this gentle stretch of ocean outside the window could be a soft place to land. But back in that VIP cabin, someone else had already decided they didn't belong there. But right now, back on the platform at Santa Marina Bay, the peace Marcus was trying so hard to protect didn't even make it past the doorway. Because the moment they stepped toward the VIP entrance, Heather Cole stepped in front of them like a gate that could talk. She wasn't loud. She didn't have to be. Her uniform was crisp. Her posture was perfect. And her smile had that practiced shine that says, "I'm being polite," while her eyes say, "Prove you belong here." "VIP access," she said, holding out a hand. "Passes and ID." Marcus handed them over without flinching. And for a second, it looked like it would be simple. But Heather didn't scan the passes the way she scanned everyone else's. She held them a little longer, tilted them toward the light, checked the names twice. Then she looked up, not at Marcus's face, but at his jacket, his shoes, the girls' backpacks, like she was measuring them against an invisible standard. Jade noticed immediately. Teenagers always do. Her shoulders tightened, her chin lifted, and the words came out before she could swallow them. "We already showed those at check-in." Heather didn't blink. "Random verification," she said smoothly. "It happens." Then she nodded toward Luna's bag. "And I'll need to take a quick look through that." Luna's fingers clenched around the sketchbook inside like it could feel fear. Marcus kept his voice calm. "That's a child's personal item," he said. "Is there a reason?" Heather's smile widened just a fraction. "Sir, it's policy." And there it was, that word, policy. The safest word in the world for someone who wants to hurt you without admitting they're hurting you. Because when you say, "I don't like you," people can argue with you. But when you say, "I'm just following protocol," suddenly you sound neutral, professional, untouchable. Heather waved her scanner again, slower this time, as if the machine might catch something her eyes hadn't.
Then she reached for Marcus's small carry-on. "This will also need to be weighed." Marcus glanced past her at the line behind them. People were walking through without stopping, laughing, sipping coffee, showing their passes for 2 seconds and moving on like the world was working exactly the way it was supposed to. Jade saw it too, and the unfairness hit her like heat.
"So you're weighing ours," she said, voice sharper now, "but not theirs?"
Heather didn't look back at the other passengers. She just looked at Jade, like Jade had made the mistake of speaking out of turn. "Ma'am," she said, "if you're going to be disrespectful, I can call security. That's how the power game works. Step 1, call it policy. Step 2, call you difficult. Step 3, threaten consequences." Luna shifted closer to Marcus, her eyes flicking between Heather's face and the VIP sign above them, like she was trying to understand what she was doing wrong just by standing there. And Marcus felt Jade ready to explode. He could feel it the way you feel a storm in the air before the first lightning strikes. So he did the one thing adults do when they're trying to keep a family from breaking apart in public. He grounded them. He leaned slightly toward Jade and spoke low, almost gentle. "Don't let her pull you down to her level," he said. "Stay polite, stay steady."
Jade's jaw clenched, but she swallowed the rest of what she wanted to say. Because Marcus wasn't telling her to accept it. He was telling her not to give Heather the satisfaction of turning them into the problem. And standing a few steps away, watching all of this happen with wide, unsure eyes, was Nina Brooks. New uniform, new badge, new to the job in a way you could feel. Nina saw Heather stop them, saw the extra scanning, the unnecessary weighing, the way her voice changed when she spoke to this family. And Nina's face did that thing people's faces do when their conscience shows up in real time. She wanted to say something. You could tell. Her lips parted. Her hand lifted, then dropped again like she remembered the rules faster than she remembered her courage. Because Nina wasn't Heather. Nina wasn't cruel. But Nina was afraid. Afraid of making waves. Afraid of getting it wrong. Afraid of being labeled dramatic on her first month in. So she stood there, silent, and watched. And that's when you start to see what's really happening. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Most discrimination today doesn't come wearing a hood. It comes wearing a badge. It hides inside harmless words like random check, procedure, verification, standard. When someone says, "I'm just doing my job," they're putting on a moral shield. They're pretending they're not making a choice when they absolutely are. Rules in themselves aren't evil. Rules can keep people safe. But the danger begins when the rule only wakes up for certain people. When the protocol is suddenly strict, but only when you walk up. When the system becomes a spotlight, and somehow it keeps landing on the same kinds of faces. And that's why moments like this are so hard to fight. Because nothing Heather did looked dramatic on camera. She didn't scream. She didn't curse. She smiled. She used the right words. And she made the family feel like they had to prove they deserved the same peace everyone else was being handed for free. So the question isn't, was there a policy? The real question is the one nobody wants to say out loud. Why did that policy only seem to matter when it was them? And once Heather got them past the entrance, she didn't relax. She escalated. Not with yelling, not with slurs, not with anything that would look bad on a quick clip. No. Heather used the cleanest kind of cruelty, the kind you can call professional. "Just wait here," she said, pointing them toward a narrow strip of space beside the door, away from the flow of VIP passengers. "We need to verify something in the system." Marcus glanced past her into the lounge. Soft lighting, quiet music, people settling in like they belonged there without having to prove it.
A couple in linen outfits laughing over sparkling water.
A businessman scrolling on his phone, shoes kicked out, taking up space like the world owed him comfort. And then Marcus looked back at Heather. "Verify what?" he asked, calm. "You already scanned our passes." Heather didn't even pretend to feel embarrassed.
"It's an additional check," she said, "for certain situations."
Certain situations.
She didn't say what she meant. She didn't have to. Jade heard it anyway. Her face tightened, and Marcus felt her breathing change, quick, shallow, like she was trying not to cry and not to scream at the same time. "Can we at least sit down?" Jade asked, trying to keep her voice even. "My sister's tired." Heather's eyes flicked to Luna, then away, like Luna was an inconvenience with a heartbeat. "The lounge seating is for confirmed VIP guests," she said. "Until your verification clears, you'll need to remain here." Remain here. Like they were luggage. Like they were a problem being contained.
Luna held the sketchbook tighter, pressing it to her chest, the way a child clings to a blanket during a thunderstorm. Her eyes kept darting toward the lounge, then back to the strip of floor they'd been assigned, as if she was trying to understand an invisible rule she'd somehow broken. And that's the thing about this kind of humiliation. It doesn't punch you. It makes you question yourself. Maybe we did something wrong. Maybe we misunderstood. Maybe we don't belong. Marcus felt that familiar instinct rise, the one every decent person has when they're being treated unfairly in public. Fight back. Say something louder. Make a scene. But he also knew Heather wanted that. Because if Marcus raised his voice, she could label him aggressive. If Jade snapped, she could call her unruly. And then the story would change from a family being mistreated to a staff member dealing with difficult passengers. That's how people like Heather survive. They don't just control the space, they control the narrative.
So Marcus did what he always did when life tried to steal his dignity. He got quiet. Not weak, strategic. He lowered his phone slightly, angled it toward his palm, and hit record, careful, subtle, almost invisible. No dramatic movement, no announcement, just evidence. Because in places like this, feelings don't move systems. Proof does. Jade noticed the phone and swallowed hard, like she understood what Marcus was doing without him saying a word. But her eyes were still burning. And it wasn't just Heather. It was everyone else. Because people saw it. They absolutely saw it. A woman at the refreshment bar glanced over, took in the scene, then turned her body away like she hadn't. A man walking past slowed for half a second, looked at Luna clutching that sketchbook, then stared at his shoes like the floor was suddenly fascinating.
Two passengers made eye contact with Jade, and then immediately looked through her, the way you look through a window you don't want to clean. That's what polite violence looks like. No bruises, no shouting. Just 100 tiny signals that say, "You're not one of us." And the worst part? Heather didn't even have to keep talking. All she had to do was stand there, holding her scanner like a badge of moral authority, while the room quietly agreed not to get involved. Nina Brooks was nearby again, pretending to straighten a stack of brochures that didn't need straightening. And she kept looking over, looking away, looking back. Her throat moved like she was swallowing words she wasn't allowed to say. Because Nina knew this wasn't right. But knowing something isn't right and risking your job to say it, those are two different kinds of courage. Luna's voice finally broke the silence, soft, small. "Mr. Marcus, are we in trouble?" That question landed like a weight. Because no child asks that in a place that's supposed to be safe.
unless someone has made them feel guilty for simply existing. Marcus crouched slightly so he could meet her eyes, not from above her, but beside her. "No," he said gently. "You're not in trouble. You didn't do anything wrong." He said it like he needed Luna to believe it. And maybe, deep down, he needed to believe it too. Because Heather's power wasn't in what she could do with her hands. It was in what she could do to your mind. She could make you stand there in silence while your own doubt did half the damage for her. And right then, on that narrow strip of floor outside the VIP lounge, Jade wasn't just fighting Heather. Luna wasn't just fighting fear. Marcus was fighting the oldest lie discrimination ever taught people in quiet places. If they treat you like you don't belong long enough, you'll start to wonder if it's true.
And that's when Heather decided to stop playing with paperwork and start playing with something you can't file an appeal for: memory. It happened in the most accidental way possible. A tray of coffee cups, a tight aisle, a gentle sway of the train as it cut along the coastline. Heather moving through the VIP lounge like she owned the air in it. Marcus was still standing with Jade and Luna near the edge of the room, close enough to see the comfort, but not close enough to touch it. And Luna still had that sketchbook pressed against her chest, not like a toy, like a promise. Heather approached with the tray balanced in one hand, her other hand free, too free. Her eyes flicked down for half a second, taking note of what Luna was holding. Then she smiled. Not a warm smile. A smile that said, "I see exactly what you care about." "Excuse me," Heather said, voice smooth, polite enough to sound harmless. Marcus shifted slightly, making space. Jade instinctively pulled Luna a little behind her. And in that tiny movement, just a breath, just a step, Heather's shoulder caught the edge of Marcus's bag. The tray tilted. Not dramatically. Not enough for anyone to gasp right away. Just enough. Coffee slid like dark ink across the plastic lip, and then poured straight down onto the sketchbook. It hit the cover first, then seeped into the pages. And for a second, nobody moved. Because the human brain does this strange thing when something sacred gets damaged in front of you. It freezes, like it's trying to deny what it just saw. Luna made a sound, small, sharp, almost animal. "No, no, no, no." She yanked the sketchbook up, but it was too late. Coffee had already bled into the paper, spreading fast, turning clean lines into shadows. Jade lunged forward.
"What is wrong with you?"
But Marcus caught her wrist, not to stop her from caring, to stop her from giving Heather what she wanted. Because Heather's face didn't show panic. It didn't show regret. It showed patience. Like she was waiting for the moment Jade would explode so she could point and say, "See, this is why we have protocols." "Oh my gosh," Heather said, hand to her chest, voice syrupy. "I am so sorry." The train shifted. It happens. It happens. As if a ruined memory was just a spill. As if the thing Luna was holding was replaceable. Marcus didn't say a word yet. He didn't have to. Because Luna did. She opened the sketchbook with shaking fingers, flipping to the page the coffee had hit the hardest. A drawing, done in colored pencil, careful and patient. A woman's hands holding two smaller hands, ocean behind them, a little sun in the corner. The kind of drawing that isn't good in an art school way, but is priceless in a family way. Luna's chin trembled, her lips parted, and then the words came out like they'd been trapped in her chest. "That's my mom." The lounge went quiet. Not polite quiet. The kind of quiet that means the room just realized it walked into something moral.
Luna stared at the smeared page, blinking fast, trying to stop tears like a child thinks tears are a choice. "She drew that," Luna whispered, before she got sick. She told me to keep it safe. She told me this is how I remember her when I miss her." Her voice cracked on the last word. And suddenly, all the VIP comfort in that room looked cheap. Because nothing about sparkling water and leather seats matters when a child is standing there holding a ruined piece of someone they loved. Jade's knees actually buckled for a second. Not because she was weak, because grief has a way of knocking you off balance when it gets hit again. She pressed her palm to her mouth, eyes filling, anger and sadness mixing into something she couldn't control. Marcus felt it too, that surge behind his eyes, the heat in his throat. The part of you that wants to roar, because being disrespected is one thing, but having someone disrespect you're dead? That crosses a line you don't come back from. He looked at Heather, really looked. And what scared him wasn't that she spilled coffee. It was that she was still standing there like the victim of bad timing, still acting like this was just unfortunate. Marcus's hand tightened around his phone in his pocket, still recording. Because he understood something in that moment that a lot of people don't understand until it's too late. Microaggressions hurt. Public humiliation hurts. But when someone damages the one thing a grieving family is holding on to, they're not just trying to make you feel small. They're trying to erase the proof that you ever mattered to someone. Marcus finally spoke, and his voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. "You didn't just spill a drink," he said quietly. "You spilled it on the only thing in this room that can't be replaced."
Heather's smile flickered, just a little, like a mask slipping.
"I said I'm sorry," she replied, sharper now. "Accidents happen. If you'd like, I can—" "No," Marcus cut in, calm as a warning. "Don't touch it." And that sentence, simple, controlled, did something to the air. Because everyone heard it. Everyone understood it. This wasn't about coffee anymore. This was about power. About what some people think they're allowed to destroy just because they can. And as Luna cried silently over the smeared drawing of her mother's hands, the entire lounge realized they weren't watching a customer service issue. They were watching a moral line get crossed. And the question wasn't whether Marcus and those girls belonged in VIP. The question was how far Heather was willing to go to prove they didn't. The coffee kept dripping from the edge of the sketchbook like it had all the time in the world. Luna's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the pages open.
Jade was frozen between rage and grief, like her body didn't know which one to choose. And Marcus was doing that thing strong people do when they're about to break. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't pleading. He was just standing there, jaw tight, eyes glassy, breathing through it. And Heather adjusted her posture like she'd just survived an inconvenience. "I already apologized," she said, voice clipped now. "Accidents happen. If you can't remain calm, I'll have to follow VIP conduct protocol." VIP conduct protocol. That was the moment the room could have gone one of two ways. Either everyone keeps looking down at their phones, or someone finally says what everybody just saw. And that someone was Eleanor Price. Eleanor had been sitting by the window the whole time, a neat little handbag on her lap, silver hair pulled back, the kind of posture you only get after a lifetime of showing up on time and doing what's right. A retired teacher.
The kind of woman who spent decades telling children, "Use your words," while watching adults do the opposite. At first, she'd tried to stay out of it. She'd watched Heather verify their pass. She'd watched the extra questions, the tone, the little pauses that weren't really pauses. And, like so many people, she'd told herself the same lie we all tell ourselves when we don't want to get involved. Maybe I'm misunderstanding. Maybe it's not my place. Maybe it'll calm down. But when Luna said, "That's my mom," and the room went silent, Eleanor's face changed. Not into anger, into recognition. Because grief looks the same on every child, and cruelty sounds the same in every adult. Eleanor stood up slowly, and that alone was loud. Chairs creaked, heads turned. A few people lifted their eyes like they'd been woken up. Heather snapped her gaze toward her, already annoyed. "Ma'am, please remain seated," Heather said. "This is being handled." Eleanor didn't sit. She stepped forward just enough for everyone to hear her voice clearly. "No," she said, calm, firm, not shaking. "It's not being handled, it's being covered." Heather blinked. "Excuse me?" Eleanor pointed, not dramatically, precisely. "I watched you stop this family the moment they entered the lounge. I watched you check their pass twice when you didn't check anyone else's. I watched you question their bags when people walked right past you with bigger ones." Heather's smile returned, tight and practiced. "Those are standard verifications." Eleanor nodded once. "Then show me the standard. Show me why it only woke up for them." That hit a nerve, because suddenly it wasn't just Marcus and the girls saying it. Someone else, someone with nothing to gain, was naming the pattern out loud. And you could feel it shift. A man across the room put his phone down. A woman near the snack counter paused mid-sentence. Someone in the back subtly tilted their screen like they'd started recording without wanting to be seen. Heather tried to regain control with the only weapon she had left: authority language. "Ma'am," she said, louder now, "this is a VIP space. I can have you removed for interfering with staff duties." Eleanor didn't flinch. "Removed?" she repeated. "For speaking truth? Or for making you uncomfortable?" And then she looked past Heather, straight at the other passengers. Not at Marcus, not at Luna, at the people sitting comfortably in silence. "Everyone here saw what happened," Eleanor said. "And everyone here knows it wasn't just a spill." The room got even quieter, because now the story wasn't only about a worker with power. It was about the audience. It was about witnesses. And most of us, if we're honest, we're not the ones holding the sketchbook. We're not the ones being singled out. We're the ones sitting nearby, hearing the disrespect, feeling that twist in our stomach, and deciding whether we're going to pretend we didn't. Why do people stay quiet when something wrong is happening right in front of them? It's not always because they don't care. Sometimes it's fear. Fear of making it worse, fear of being the next target, fear of realizing too late that doing nothing was still a decision. Society trains us to think, mind your business. But discrimination isn't private business. It's moral business. And Eleanor wasn't standing there because she wanted to be a hero. She was standing there because she didn't want to go home with that old, familiar shame. I saw it, and I did nothing. Heather's face hardened. "This is unacceptable. I'm calling security." Marcus finally spoke again, quiet but clear. "Please do," he said. And that was the moment a few more people lifted their heads, as if they'd just realized something. If security shows up, this stops being a private humiliation and becomes a public record. Eleanor looked at Marcus, then at Luna, then back at the room. If anyone else saw the way they were treated, she said, "Don't look away. Don't make that child carry this alone. A beat. One person nodded. Another shifted forward. And somewhere behind Heather's shoulder, Nina Brooks, the young employee who'd been watching with panic in her eyes, took a slow breath like she was preparing to do the hardest thing a quiet person can do. Choose a side. Because right then, in that VIP lounge full of witnesses, Heather still thought she had control. But she was about to learn what happens when the truth has an audience. Jade didn't wait for permission.
She took Luna by the hand and led her out of the VIP lounge, past the glass doors, past the polished signage that promised comfort and privacy, and straight toward the one place on this train that wasn't designed for comfort at all: the emergency communication alcove. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was a small, bright corner tucked near the attendant station with a red panel, a camera lens, and a simple instruction label that basically said, "If something is wrong, press here." Luna stared at it like it was a door she wasn't supposed to open. Her cheeks were still wet. The sketchbook was hugged tight against her chest, coffee-stained pages pressed into her sweater, like she could keep the damage from spreading just by holding it harder. Marcus followed a step behind, calm on the outside, burning on the inside. He didn't tell Luna what to say. He just crouched beside her and spoke low, steady, like he was giving her something to stand on. "Tell the truth," he said.
Slow, clear, and don't let anybody make you feel like you're doing something wrong. Because that's the trick in places like this. They don't always beat you with fists. Sometimes they beat you with doubt. Luna swallowed. Jade nodded to her like, "You've got this." And Luna raised her hand and pressed the red button. A soft chime. A camera light blinked on. And then, ringing. One ring. Two. The screen flickered, and suddenly, Caleb Morgan appeared. Not in a suit, not in a boardroom. He looked like a man who had been pulled out of a busy life mid-step. Open collar, phone angled slightly wrong, a background that suggested he was in transit himself. He blinked like he was about to say, "Can this wait?" But then he saw Luna's face, and you could watch the switch flip. Because adults can ignore complaints. Adults can ignore email chains. Adults can ignore feedback. But it is very hard to ignore a child who looks like she just lost something sacred.
"Luna," Caleb said, his voice dropping.
"Hey, what's going on?" Luna tried to speak, but her throat tightened. Jade leaned in. "Mr. Morgan, it's Jade. We're on the coastal line, VIP compartment. Something happened." Caleb's eyes sharpened. "Where's Marcus?" Marcus stepped into frame. "I'm here." Caleb exhaled, like he already knew this wasn't going to be small. "Talk to me," he said. "Start from the beginning." And that's when Luna did something that would change everything. She didn't start with anger. She didn't start with blaming. She started with the one thing nobody could argue with: the sketchbook. "It was my mom's," Luna said, voice trembling. "It has her drawings. She drew me in it. And the lady, she spilled coffee, and she keeps saying we don't belong in there." Caleb's expression tightened, not because he was shocked that someone could be cruel, but because he understood what this really was. This wasn't a spill. This was power. Small power, used like a weapon in a closed space where you can't just walk away. Caleb's eyes flicked to Marcus. "Do you have anything recorded?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Yes, and there are witnesses. Eleanor Price, several passengers, and one staff member, Nina Brooks. She saw everything." Caleb nodded once, like a judge setting a gavel down in his mind. "Okay," he said, "here's what we're going to do." And this is where the story stops being only emotion and starts becoming a mechanism. "Marcus, don't argue with her anymore," Caleb said. "Don't escalate. Stay polite. Keep recording if it's safe. Jade, stay with Luna." Then Caleb looked straight into the lens, as if he was speaking not just to them, but to the system behind them. "I'm contacting root operations right now," he said. "Not customer service, not a complaint line. Operations. I want an incident report opened in real time." He turned his phone away for half a second, thumbs moving fast. You could hear the dialing tone.
And then another voice answered on speaker. "Root Ops, this is Delgado." "This is Caleb Morgan," Caleb said. "I need an on-site supervisor to meet Car 7 at the next stop, VIP compartment. Possible discrimination and staff misconduct. I want passenger statements taken immediately. I want the staff involved separated, and I want the security log pulled." There was a pause on the line. The kind of pause that usually means, "Who do you think you are?" But then the voice changed. "Yes, sir," Delgado said. "Understood. Which stop?" Caleb glanced at the display panel above the corridor. "Next stop is Driftwood Point, 22 minutes. Supervisor will be there," Delgado said. "We'll open a report now." Caleb ended the call, and for a moment, the three of them just stared at the screen, because the air felt different. Not safer, not healed, just different. Like the door had finally opened. Caleb looked back at Luna, softening. "Luna," he said, "you did the right thing. You hear me? The right thing." Luna's lower lip trembled again. "But what if we didn't know you?" And there it was, the question that stings. The question that makes this story bigger than one train. Because if we're being honest, most people don't have a Caleb. Most people press the button and get a script. Most people file the complaint and get a form email. Most people walk away with a voucher and a quiet ache that never got named. So imagine a different version of this moment. No Caleb on the screen. No direct line to route operations. No supervisor waiting at the next stop. Just Marcus trying to stay calm. Jade trying not to explode. Luna trying not to believe the lie that she doesn't belong. In that version, Marcus still records, he still writes, he still reports. And maybe, weeks later, someone replies with an apology that sounds polite and empty. Maybe there's a discount code. Maybe there's a, "We take these concerns seriously," but no consequence you can see. No accountability you can feel. And Luna learns a lesson she should never have to learn at 9 years old. Not that her voice matters, but that her voice only matters if someone important hears it. That's the dangerous part. Because the real question isn't, "Thank God Caleb answered." The real question is, why does it take Caleb for the system to wake up? Caleb held Luna's gaze through the screen. "It shouldn't matter who you can call," he said quietly. "Wrong is wrong, and we're going to treat it like that." Then his voice hardened again. "Marcus," he said, "stay where you are. Keep the witnesses close. When the supervisor arrives, I want names, times, statements, everything." He paused. Because in a closed space like this, justice doesn't move on feelings alone. It moves when the truth has a record. And back in the VIP lounge, Heather was still standing tall, still clinging to her little kingdom of rules, completely unaware that a mini courtroom had just been assembled around her. Caleb didn't just end the call and move on. He stayed on the line as the train pushed toward Driftwood Point, watching the live updates come in like he was watching a storm map.
Because once you've seen a child cry over something sacred, you don't fix it with a refund. You fix it by finding out how it was allowed to happen. And at the next stop, when the on-site supervisor stepped on board, badge clipped, tablet in hand, voice all business, Heather's posture changed. Not because she suddenly felt remorse, but because she finally felt gravity. Her smile was thinner. Her words were cleaner. And she started saying the same sentence over and over like it was a shield. I was following protocol. That phrase, that sweet little escape hatch, because protocol makes you sound neutral.
Like you're not cruel, just responsible. But the problem was, Caleb wasn't interested in her story. He was interested in her pattern.
The supervisor began taking statements right there in the corridor where other passengers could see and hear. Eleanor Price spoke first, calm, clear, teacher voice. I saw her single them out, Eleanor said. I saw her deny them access. I heard the tone, and I saw the spill. Then 2 more passengers nodded and added details, timestamps, seat numbers, the way Heather hovered like a guard instead of a service worker. Marcus handed over his recording without theatrics, just facts. Because in a closed space like this, you don't win by yelling louder. You win by making the truth impossible to erase. Heather tried again. None of this is what it seems, she said. They were being disruptive. The young woman was aggressive. Jade's eyes flashed, ready to jump in, but Marcus lifted one hand gently, not to silence her, to protect her.
Because he knew exactly what Heather was trying to do. Turn a family into a problem. Turn a child into an incident. Turn disrespect into policy enforcement. And then Caleb's voice came through the supervisor's earpiece, low and steady. Pull her employee file, he said, right now. I want her complaint history, across routes. Heather's face twitched, just for a second, like a door inside her head had slammed. The supervisor tapped quickly, scrolling, logging in, requesting access. And then his expression changed. Not shock, recognition. Sir, he said quietly, turning slightly away from Heather. There was a complaint last year on the northern segment. Similar allegation. Heather jumped in fast. That was nothing, she snapped. That was a misunderstanding. The supervisor kept reading. It says, case closed, insufficient evidence. Heather exhaled like she'd been handed a winning card. Exactly, she said, a little too pleased. No evidence. But Caleb didn't sound impressed. He sounded tired of that sentence, he said. Who closed it? The supervisor hesitated, then scrolled further down. Shift manager signed off, he said. Name, Brent Halloway. And that's when the story took a turn Heather didn't see coming. Because it wasn't just Heather. It was the person who made sure Heather stayed Heather. The kind of manager who never has to insult anyone directly. He just has to make sure the paperwork never sticks. The kind of person who hides behind not enough evidence while the behavior repeats and repeats and repeats. Nina Brooks had been standing a few feet away this whole time, frozen like she didn't know where her hands belonged. New uniform, new job, old fear. Because she'd seen Heather's face before. Not literally, emotionally. The confidence of someone who knows complaints don't follow them. And Nina's voice finally broke through, small but firm. I reported something, she said. Everyone turned. Heather's head snapped toward her like a whip. What? Nina swallowed hard. Her eyes flicked to Marcus, to Jade, to Luna clutching that ruined sketchbook, and then to Eleanor, who gave her the smallest nod. The kind that says,
"You're not alone." "I reported her," Nina said again, clearer this time. "Not today. Before. On my second week." The supervisor looked up. "To who?" Nina's cheeks flushed. "To Mr. Holloway. Brent." Heather laughed, sharp, dismissive. "Oh, please," she said. "You were new. You didn't understand what you were seeing. And that line right there? That's how systems stay dirty. They don't just silence the victims. They train the witnesses to doubt themselves." Nina's hands shook, but she didn't back down. "I understood," she said. "I understood enough to feel sick. I told him she was targeting certain passengers, checking their passes twice, talking down to them, making them feel small." Her voice cracked, but she forced it steady.
"And he told me to stop making accusations without proof." Caleb's silence on the line was heavy. Then he spoke, each word measured. "So you did the right thing," he said to Nina, "and you were punished for it." Nina blinked fast, fighting tears. "I wasn't punished," she whispered. "I was warned." Caleb's voice hardened. "A warning is a punishment when it teaches you to stay quiet." Heather tried to recover, tried to turn toward the supervisor like she could charm her way out. "Come on," she said. "We're really going to do this? Over some coffee?" And Marcus finally looked her dead in the eye. "It's not over coffee," he said, voice calm, but carrying something sharp underneath. "It's over what you thought you were allowed to do to a child." The supervisor lowered his tablet. "Miss Cole," he said, "you will step off this compartment until the next stop. You will not engage with passengers. You will not return to duty today."
Heather's mouth opened like she couldn't believe a boundary was being placed around her. And that's when Caleb delivered the real twist. "Also," he said, "Brent Holloway is being removed from shift authority effective immediately. Full audit, full review. Because this wasn't just about catching one person being cruel. This was about exposing the machine that protected her cruelty." And in that moment, the pieces finally clicked into place. The damaged sketchbook wasn't just a prop, it was the proof. Eleanor wasn't just a kind stranger, she was the witness. Caleb wasn't just a powerful contact, he was the authority that forced action. And the report being opened in real time? That was the consequence. Official, documented, impossible to soften. That's the difference between a painful story and a closed case. Heather stood there, surrounded by eyes that were no longer looking away. And for the first time on this trip, she wasn't in charge of the narrative. The truth was. By the time the train finally eased into the next stop, the adrenaline had burned off. What was left was the part nobody puts in the highlight reel. The shaking hands, the dry throat, the way your body starts to feel heavy, like it's been carrying something for miles. Marcus stepped out into the narrow corridor with Luna pressed against his chest, her face tucked into his jacket like she was trying to disappear into a place that still felt safe. Jade stood a few steps behind them, staring at the floor, jaw clenched so tight you could see the muscle jump. Not because they lost, not because they won. Because when you've had to defend your right to exist in a public space, you don't walk away feeling victorious. You walk away feeling tired. And in that quiet, you could see it on Luna's face. That fragile, confusing question kids carry after humiliation. Was it my fault? Was I wrong to be here? Marcus didn't give her a speech. He didn't say, "Don't worry, sweetheart," and rush past it like it was nothing. He crouched down so his eyes were level with hers. And he spoke the way you speak when you want a child's nervous system to believe you. "Look at me," he said softly. "You did nothing wrong." Luna's bottom lip trembled. "But," she said. "I know what she said," Marcus cut in, gentle but firm. "And she was wrong." Then he placed one hand over the sketchbook, the one Luna had been holding like a heartbeat. The pages were stained. The ink was smudged. The damage was real. But Marcus treated it like it was still holy. Because that's what children watch. Not what you say you believe. What you protect when it costs you something. A few feet away, the supervisor was finishing the report, and Caleb was still on the line. Not with dramatic threats, with something better. With structure. "New policy," Caleb said, "effective immediately."
Any complaint involving discrimination in VIP service gets escalated outside the local chain. No more handled internally by the same people who benefit from silence. The supervisor nodded as he typed. Caleb kept going. "Witness statements are to be recorded. Video evidence is to be preserved. And employees who report misconduct get protected. No retaliation, no warnings, no career punishment disguised as coaching." He paused, and his tone sharpened like a blade. "And anyone who buries a complaint, anyone who softens a report, they're done." That mattered, because consequences aren't just punishment. They're a message to the next person in line. Now here's the part that hits deeper than policies. Kids don't learn dignity from motivational quotes. They learn it from what the adults do when it's uncomfortable. A lot of parents tell their children, "You're special, you're worthy, you belong anywhere." But then the moment someone disrespects them in public, the parent laughs it off, or apologizes for existing, or says, "Just be quiet, don't make a scene." And the child absorbs that like a law of nature. Not the words, the posture, the silence. Because children don't grow up into the life you lecture them about. They grow up into the life you model. Marcus didn't model revenge. He modeled backbone. He didn't scream. He didn't threaten. He didn't beg. He stayed calm, stayed clear, and refused to shrink his family down to make a stranger comfortable. That's what "you belong" looks like in real life. Not a slogan, a stance. And there's something else most people don't realize until it's too late. A child's brain doesn't file humiliation the same way it files a compliment. A compliment is warm, but it's light, it floats. Humiliation is heavy, it lands, and it sticks. Because the brain is wired to remember what feels like social danger. When a child is singled out, embarrassed, treated like they don't belong, their brain doesn't just hear, "That person doesn't like me." It records something darker. "This place is not safe for me." And it could happen again. And if no adult corrects that moment right then out loud, kids start correcting it themselves. They write their own explanation. Maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I really don't belong. So when Marcus looked Luna in the eyes and said, "You did nothing wrong," he wasn't just comforting her. He was rewriting the story her brain was about to store. He was telling her nervous system, in the clearest language it understands, the world can be unfair, but you are not alone in it. Luna wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, still small, still shaky. And Marcus pulled her into his chest again, holding her like an anchor. Then he said something that wasn't loud enough for the whole cabin, just for her. "Baby, you don't ask permission to exist," he whispered. "You don't apologize for taking up space." Jade finally exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for an hour. And for the first time since this started, Luna nodded. Not because the stain disappeared, not because the hurt never happened,
but because the most important lesson had landed, not in a sentence, in the way an adult stood up so a child wouldn't have to spend her whole life sitting down. Later that night, the noise of the train was gone. No announcements, no watchful eyes, no protocol said like a weapon. Just a quiet room, a soft lamp, and Luna sitting cross-legged on the bed with the sketchbook open in her lap. The stain was still there, a brown tide across the page, dried into the paper like a scar that refused to disappear. And for a second, you could see that same question flicker in her face again. If something precious can be ruined that easily, what about me? But then Luna reached for a pencil, not the fancy kind.
Just a regular one. The kind kids always have in their backpack like it's part of their identity. She flipped to a clean page, and she started drawing. Slow at first, careful, like she was afraid the world might spill on this page too. Then, steadier. She drew the shoreline they'd been traveling beside, the water, the lights of the harbor, the shape of the train cutting through the night like a promise. And in the corner, she drew a small figure holding a book close to their chest. Still there, still standing. Jade watched from the doorway, arms crossed, trying to look tough while her eyes betrayed her. Marcus sat on the edge of the chair, silent, letting the moment do what no argument ever could. Because here's the truth. Justice isn't magic. It's not a miracle that drops from the sky when the right people show up. Justice is a habit of people who refuse to look away, a habit of asking the question that makes everyone uncomfortable.
Why is the rule only waking up for me? A rule is only justice when it's applied evenly, when it's consistent, when it's not a hiding place for someone's bias wearing a uniform. And dignity doesn't ask permission. It doesn't beg for a seat. It doesn't shrink to make strangers feel powerful. Dignity is protected when someone tells the truth in front of witnesses and forces the system to answer. Because that's what changed everything on that train. Not anger, not a perfect speech. 4 things lined up at the same time. A symbol that mattered. A child's sketchbook. Witnesses who refused to pretend they didn't see. Authority that couldn't shrug it off. And consequences that made the next person think twice. And if you're watching this thinking, well, good for them, they had the right connection. Yeah, that's exactly why this story matters. Because most people don't get a Caleb. Most people get a form, a hotline, a quiet, polite email that goes nowhere.
So the real question isn't, what would you do if someone powerful was listening? It's, what would you do if nobody was? Because sometimes the only thing that separates a person being crushed and a person being protected is one honest sentence from a stranger. I saw that. So let me ask you something, and I want you to really sit with it. Have you ever been judged just by how you looked? Or have you ever watched someone else get treated unfairly and stayed quiet because you didn't want trouble? If you could replay that moment, what would you choose now? Drop it in the comments. And remember this, every time you say, I saw it, you're not just helping someone else. You're teaching the world what it's allowed to do to the vulnerable, and what it's not.